The wind swept across the open plains, carrying with it the smell of dust, sage, and something bitter, the scent of endings. Miles away from any town, the small farm of the Wendell family sat quietly at the edge of the prairie. The house was old and plain, its paint long faded, its windows like tired eyes that had seen too much. Inside that house lived Clara Wendell, the daughter everyone pitied, but no one truly saw she was 26, which in those days meant too old to be courted, too old to be chosen, and as the whispers said, too broken to bear children. The story of her infertility had followed her like a shadow since she was 19. A sickness, the doctor said. Fever from childbirth that took her chance of ever conceiving again. Her first baby had been stillborn. The boy she was promised to never came back after hearing the news. For years she had stayed behind on the farm, working quietly, washing dishes, mending clothes, and listening to her mother's soft sighs of disappointment and her father's silence that said even more. To her siblings, she was a burden, the spinster daughter who never married, who'd never bring them a dowry or alliance. So when word came that a lonely rancher far west was looking for a wife, someone to keep house and help tend his land, her brothers saw it as a cruel joke waiting to happen. Send her, they'd said, laughing over supper. Maybe she'll finally be good for something. And so they did. The morning Clara left, the sky was the color of smoke. She stood by the wagon, her small suitcase in hand. Inside it were 3 dresses, a Bible, and the baby blanket she had kept all these years. The only memory of the child she never held. Her mother hugged her without warmth, her hands cold and trembling. Be good, she said. Do what the man asks. Make yourself useful. Her brothers laughed behind her, whispering that no man would keep her long. Clara said nothing. She simply climbed into the wagon, her eyes fixed on the long stretch of dirt road that led west. The driver, a quiet man with a hat too big for his head, gave her a polite nod. You'll be meeting Mr. Calder at Dry Creek Station, he said. Good man. Hard but fair. She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. As the wagon rolled away, she didn't look back. Not once. The journey was long and harsh. They passed through dry plains, rivers that shimmered like glass and canyons that split the land open like a wound. The nights were cold, the stars sharp and endless above. Clara kept mostly to herself. She spoke little, but she watched everything. The changing colors of the sky, the way the land seemed to breathe under the sun. Somewhere deep inside, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, a strange, cautious hope. When the wagon finally stopped at Dry Creek, the driver pointed toward a man standing near the hitching post. That's him, he said. Rancher Calder. Clara followed his gaze. The man waiting there was tall, broad-shouldered, his face rough and sunburned. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray, deep, unreadable. He looked like the land itself, scarred, strong, and silent. He tipped his hat when she stepped down. Mrs. Wendell? Miss, she corrected softly. Clara Wendell. Ah, he said after a pause. Well, Miss Wendell, I'm Sam Calder. His voice was steady, low, the kind that could calm horses. He looked her over once, not in judgment, but like a man measuring truth. She looked back at him, chin lifted slightly. After a moment, he nodded. Wagon's out back. Long ride still to the ranch. Hope you ain't tired of the road. I've been tired for a long time, Mr. Calder, she said simply. A small smile touched his lips. Then you'll fit right in. The Calder ranch sat in a wide valley surrounded by red hills and cottonwoods. The house was modest, built strong, not pretty, and the barn stretched out like the ribs of a sleeping animal. There were no servants, no family, no laughter, just the sound of cattle and wind. As the days passed, Clara worked without complaint. She cooked, cleaned, mended, and tended to the garden that had been half dead when she arrived. Sam noticed how her hands never stopped moving, how she rose before sunrise and stayed up long after dark. She didn't chatter, didn't pry. She simply existed beside him, quiet and sure like a presence the house had been waiting for. One evening after supper, Sam leaned against the porch rail, watching the sky fade from orange to blue. Clara came out, wiping her hands on her apron. Pretty night, he said. She nodded. It is. Been a while since I had company here, he said. Place gets awful empty. Emptiness isn't always bad, she replied. Sometimes it's better than noise that hurts. He turned to look at her, and something in his eyes softened. Your family send you here? he asked after a pause. She hesitated. Yes, willingly. A long silence followed. Then quietly she said, They sent me because they thought you'd send me back. Sam blinked. Why would they think that? She looked out over the fields. Because they think I'm broken. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. Doctor said I can't bear children. My brothers think that means I ain't worth nothing. So they sent me here as a joke. The words fell heavy between them. The wind rustled the grass. Sam's jaw tightened. That ain't funny. No, she said softly. It isn't. He turned fully to face her then, his voice low. Well, Miss Wendell, I didn't ask for a child. I asked for help. And you've given me plenty already. Her eyes met his. For a moment, neither looked away. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. You don't owe thanks. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, the air filled with the song of crickets. Clara stood beside him, and for the first time in years she felt something she hadn't dared to believe in. Peace. Later that night, she lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Her mind drifted back to her family. The cruel laughter, the whispers, the cold eyes that had followed her out of that house. They had sent her away in shame. But as she listened to the wind outside, to the soft breathing of the ranch as it settled into night, Clara made herself a promise. She would build a life here. She would plant roots deep enough that no one could tear them out again. And though she didn't yet know how, she felt in her heart that this barren land, this lonely ranch, might give her something she had lost long ago. A second chance. The weeks rolled by slowly on the Calder ranch, the kind of slow that only life in the wilderness could bring. Each day began before the sun lifted its head and ended long after the stars had settled over the valley. Clara Wendell found herself falling into a rhythm she never expected to love. The rhythm of hard work and quiet evenings, of open skies and silence that no longer felt like loneliness. In the mornings, she rose before dawn, kindling the stove fire and heating water for coffee. She liked those early hours, the world still half asleep, the horizon just beginning to blush with light. She'd step outside, breathe in the cool air, and watch the fog lift from the pastures. The land seemed endless, a sea of gold and dust stretching as far as her eyes could see. Sam Calder would already be outside by then, feeding the horses or checking fences. He was a man of few words, steady and careful with everything he did, from hammering a loose board to saddling his mare. But there was something in the way he moved, something quiet and protective, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since childhood. Clara had been around men all her life, brothers who mocked her, suitors who turned away the moment they learned she could not give them children. But Sam was different. He spoke to her like she was worth listening to, like her silence wasn't emptiness but peace. One morning, as she was hanging laundry near the corral, she heard his voice behind her. "You've been working hard," he said. She turned, squinting against the sunlight. "Someone's got to. The ranch doesn't run itself," he smiled faintly. "You're not afraid of a little dirt, I'll give you that." She looked down at her hands, blistered and red from scrubbing, and laughed quietly. "Dirt washes off easier than shame." Sam's smile faded a little, the weight of her words sinking between them. He didn't ask what she meant, and she was grateful for that. Life on the ranch wasn't easy, but it was honest. Clara found herself stronger than she'd ever known, hauling water, chopping vegetables, fixing torn saddle straps. The sun burned her skin. The wind cracked her lips, but she didn't care. For once, she belonged somewhere. In the evenings, she and Sam would eat together in the small kitchen. At first, the meals were quiet, just the clatter of spoons and the pop of the fire. But as the weeks passed, the silence softened into comfort. Sometimes Sam would tell her about the land, how his father had built the ranch from nothing, how the cattle drives used to run clear through the valley before the drought. Other times, Clara would talk about her childhood, about the creek behind her parents' house, where she used to sit and dream of a life beyond their farm. Neither spoke much of family, but the unspoken things between them said enough. They were two souls abandoned by life in different ways, and somehow the emptiness they carried fit together perfectly. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west. The sky darkened early, heavy with rain and wind that howled like wolves. Clara rushed to close the shutters while Sam tied the horses in the barn. Thunder cracked across the hills, shaking the ground. When he came back inside, his coat and hat dripping with rain, she handed him a towel and said, "You'll catch cold. Takes more than a little rain to kill me." he said with a small grin. She smiled back, though she noticed how the water ran down his jaw, how the lines around his eyes deepened when he smiled. Something stirred in her chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years. As the storm raged outside, they sat by the fire. The wind battered the house, the rain drummed on the roof, but inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Sam leaned back in his chair. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked suddenly. Clara looked at the flames. "No, there's nothing for me there." "Your folks?" Her eyes dimmed. "They sent me away. I was an embarrassment." He frowned. "You? Embarrassment? For what?" She hesitated. "Because I can't give a man children." Sam didn't speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You know, a child don't make a woman worth more or less. I've seen plenty of women bear 10 and never love a single one proper." His voice was low, rough around the edges, but sincere. She blinked, her throat tightening. No one had ever said that to her before. "You really believe that?" she whispered. He nodded. "A good heart's what matters, not what a person can or can't give." Her eyes met his, shimmering in the flickering light. "You're a good man, Sam Calder," she said softly. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'm just tired of seeing good folks get treated wrong." For a long time, neither of them moved. The fire popped. The wind cried outside. Something unspoken passed between them. Not passion, not yet, but something deeper. Understanding. The next morning, the storm was gone. The world outside was washed clean. The air crisp, the ground slick with new mud. Clara stepped outside barefoot, feeling the wet earth under her toes. She looked out over the valley, breathing in the scent of rain and grass. For the first time in years, she smiled. A real, full smile. Behind her, Sam came out onto the porch, mug of coffee in hand. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she replied. He nodded, watching her. "That's good." Then, after a moment, he added quietly, "You deserve it." She turned toward him, her heart thudding softly in her chest. She wanted to tell him that no one had ever said those words to her, that he'd given her something her own family never had. But she didn't. She just smiled and said, "Thank you." Days turned into weeks. The bond between them grew in the quiet ways that matter most, in shared work, in small laughter, in the silence between words. But not everyone believed that peace lasts forever. One hot afternoon, a writer came to the ranch, a stranger from town. He carried a letter for Clara. The handwriting was familiar. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. It was from her sister. The letter said that their father was ill, dying, they claimed, and that Clara was to return home at once. She read the words twice, her stomach twisting. She knew the tone too well. Her family hadn't changed. This wasn't mercy, and it was control. They wanted her back for a reason. Sam watched her face, concern deepening in his eyes. "Bad news?" he asked. She folded the letter carefully, her voice steady but cold. "They want me to come home," she said, "but they don't want me. They want to remind me what I am." He stepped closer. "You ain't what they say you are, Clara." "I know," she whispered. "But I think it's time they learn that too." Sam's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was no distance between them, no silence, no fear. In his gaze, she saw something that made her heart tremble, a promise. A promise that whatever waited back east, whatever pain or cruelty, she wouldn't face it alone. The next morning came with a pale, quiet dawn. The mist hung low across the valley, softening the outlines of the hills and barns. Clara Wendell stood by the hitching post, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. The letter from her sister clutched in one hand. The words inside burned like a coal she couldn't put out. Her family's handwriting, so familiar and cold, seemed to sneer from the page. "Father is ill. Come home at once." There was no "we miss you," no please, no warmth. Just a command, sharp and final, as if they still owned her, as if they hadn't thrown her away. Behind her, Sam Calder saddled the horses. He worked quietly, as he always did, but his movements were slower this morning, more careful. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked finally, tightening the cinch strap. Clara looked up at him. "No," she said honestly. "But I have to." Sam nodded, jaw set. "Then I'll ride with you." She opened her mouth to protest. "You don't need to." He cut her off, his voice firm. Ain't letting you face them alone. Their eyes met and held. She didn't argue again. She knew better than to waste words on a man who'd already made up his mind. The journey east took 3 days. They rode through endless plains, over rivers swollen with spring rain, past lonely farms and abandoned towns that had seen better days. Sometimes they rode in silence. Other times, Clara caught Sam watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. His eyes were full of something that both comforted and frightened her. A quiet protectiveness she didn't think she deserved. At night, they camped under the stars. Sam built the fire and Clara cooked beans and coffee over the flames. The crackling firelight painted his face in shades of gold and shadow, and every time he looked at her through the smoke, her heart stuttered just a little. She tried to keep her mind on her family, on what awaited her back home, but it was impossible not to notice him. The way his hands were steady when he worked, the way his deep voice rolled like gravel softened by warmth. He wasn't like the men she'd known before, men who measured a woman's worth by her body or her dowry. Sam didn't ask for anything. He just stayed close, kept her safe, and let her exist without needing to be anyone other than herself. On the third evening, as they stopped by a small creek, Clara sat by the water, washing her hands. The sunset spilled across the sky in deep orange and crimson, reflecting off the rippling surface. Sam crouched beside her, his hat low over his brow. "We'll be there by noon tomorrow," he said quietly. She nodded. "It feels like walking into a storm I've already survived once." "Then you know how to stand through it," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You've got a way of making things sound simple." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "It is simple," he said. "They broke something in you once. You built yourself back up. They can't take that from you now." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks under his gaze. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how his words sank deep into the hollow parts of her soul, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand lightly over his. The gesture was small, almost hesitant, but it was enough. He didn't pull away. The silence between them was full, not empty. Full of understanding, of the things neither of them dared to say aloud. When they finally reached her family's farm the next day, the sight of it struck her like a blow. Nothing had changed. The same leaning fence, the same tired house with its peeling paint and drooping porch, the same emptiness clinging to the place like a sickness. But she had changed. She dismounted slowly, her legs stiff from the ride. Sam stayed beside her, his hand brushing lightly against her arm. "You sure you want me to come in?" he asked. She nodded. "If I walk in—" "Well," her mother said flatly. "You actually came," Clara swallowed. "You said father was sick." Her mother stepped aside. "He's inside, though I don't suppose your presence will make much difference." Sam followed her through the doorway. The house smelled of dust and old wood. Clara's brothers were seated at the table, their boots muddy, their eyes sharp and smug. "Look who's back," one of them sneered. "Couldn't stay away from us after all, huh?" Clara didn't reply. She turned toward the small room in the back where her father lay in bed. The old man's breathing was shallow, his face pale. He opened his eyes when she entered, and for a fleeting second, there was something, regret maybe, in his gaze. "Clara," he rasped. She knelt beside him, her heart tightening. "I'm here, Papa," he coughed weakly. "They said you found work." "I did," she said, "with a rancher. A good man." His eyes flicked toward Sam standing in the doorway. "And this him?" She nodded. Her father gave a faint, broken smile. "You look different, girl." "How so?" "Stronger," he whispered. The words were soft, but they sank deep. She didn't realize until that moment that she'd been waiting her whole life to hear something like that from him. But before she could reply, her mother's voice cut through the room like a knife. "She's no stronger than she was before," she said bitterly. "Don't be fooled. The rancher's only pitying her." Sam's voice was low but firm. "Ma'am, you don't know what you're talking about." Her mother's glare turned to him. "And you don't know what you're taking in. She's barren, broken. She'll give you nothing." The silence that followed was heavy and cruel. Clara felt every word like a stone thrown at her chest. But Sam didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice steady as the earth. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "She's already given more than any woman I've known. She's given kindness, strength, dignity, things this world don't give easy." Her brothers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Sam looked at Clara then, and in his eyes, she saw the truth she'd always longed to believe. He didn't pity her. He saw her. And in that moment, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was no longer the girl her family had named infertile. She was a woman who had survived. She stood tall and turned to her mother, her voice calm and clear. "You sent me away as a joke," she said, "but I built a life. I found peace, and I found someone who sees me for what I am, not what I lack." Her mother's face went pale. Her brothers said nothing. Even the old house seemed to hold its breath. Then Clara took Sam's hand. "We're going home," she said. And for the first time, home didn't mean the house behind her. It meant the ranch, the open sky, the man beside her. As they rode away, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold over the horizon. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of dust and rain. And for the first time in years, Clara smiled, not out of defiance, not out of pride, but out of freedom. She had come back to the place that broke her, but she was leaving with her head high and her heart full. The road back to the ranch stretched long and golden under the late summer sun. The horses moved slow, their hooves stirring up clouds of dust that shimmered in the light like ghosts of the past. Behind them, Clara Wendell's childhood home grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely into the horizon, swallowed by the land that had once defined her sorrow. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of that sorrow pressing down on her. She felt something else instead, a deep, still kind of peace. Sam Calder rode beside her in silence, his hat pulled low, the wind tugging at the brim. He didn't speak much during the journey home, and he didn't have to. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was warm, alive with unspoken things. Clara could feel his presence like sunlight on her skin. Steady, gentle, sure. Sometimes she'd glance sideways and catch him watching her. His eyes weren't like the men she'd known before. They didn't demand or measure. They simply saw. By the time they reached the Calder ranch again, the sky was painted in strokes of pink and orange. The cattle grazed near the far fence, and the scent of rain hung faintly in the air. Clara dismounted first, brushing dust from her skirt. She looked around at the land, and wild and filled with the sound of wind rustling through the grass. "I never thought I'd call this place home," she said, softly. Sam tied the reins to the post and smiled faintly. "Most things worth loving come when you least expect them." She looked at him, her heart giving a quiet, familiar ache. "You mean the ranch?" she asked teasingly. He met her eyes, and the smallest grin pulled at his lips. "I wasn't talking about the ranch." She turned away quickly, pretending to busy herself with the saddle straps, but her hands trembled slightly. That evening, the house glowed warm with lamplight. Clara made supper, beans, cornbread, and coffee, and they ate at the small wooden table by the window. Outside, the crickets sang and the air hummed with that soft kind of peace that comes after a storm has finally passed. After supper, Sam leaned back in his chair, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. "You ever think about starting again?" he asked quietly. She looked up, uncertain. "Startin' what?" "A family, a life, something more than work and survival." His tone wasn't demanding. It was careful, as if he was afraid to break something fragile between them. Clara hesitated. "I used to dream about it," she said, "when I was younger. I wanted a child so badly I thought I'd die without one. And when the doctor said I couldn't, I thought my life was over." Her voice grew softer. "But now, I think maybe life isn't only about what we can't have. Maybe it's about what we find along the way." Sam nodded slowly, his gaze steady on hers. "You're right," he said. "Life don't care about what's fair, but sometimes it gives us something we didn't even know we needed." The firelight flickered between them, throwing soft shadows across the walls. Clara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to say something that could hold the weight of what she felt, but words had never been enough. So she simply reached across the table, her hand finding his. He didn't move for a moment, just looked down at their joined hands. Then his fingers curled around hers, rough, calloused, and gentle all at once. And in that quiet, she knew something had changed. Weeks passed. The rhythm of life on the ranch returned, mending fences, tending cattle, harvesting the small garden she had nursed back to life. The days were full, the nights peaceful, but there was something new between them now, a closeness that neither spoke of but both felt deeply. It was there in the way his hand brushed against hers when passing the coffee pot, in the way she looked for him at dusk, waiting to see his silhouette return from the pastures. Sometimes, when the nights were cool and the fire burned low, they sat together on the porch, the stars wide and endless above. Sam would talk, slowly, carefully, about his past. He told her about the wife he'd lost years ago to fever, about the child she'd carried who never took a breath. His voice would break sometimes when he spoke of them, and Clara would listen in silence, her heart aching with understanding. After that, he said one night, I stopped believing God had much left for me. And now? She asked gently. He looked at her for a long moment. Now I think maybe he was just waiting on the right person to remind me life ain't done yet. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She just reached out and laid her hand over his. You remind me too, she whispered. The night stretched quiet and tender around them, two souls scarred by loss, finding light again in each other's presence. A few months later, while tending to the garden one morning, Clara heard a cry, faint, thin, and desperate. She froze, her heart skipping. It came again, a baby's cry. She dropped the basket of vegetables and ran toward the sound. Near the edge of the property, hidden beneath a mesquite bush, she found a small bundle wrapped in a torn blanket. Inside it was a newborn child, no more than a few days old, trembling and red-faced from cold. Clara gasped and knelt beside the infant, her hands shaking as she lifted it gently. The baby's skin was soft, its tiny fingers grasping at the air. A note was pinned to the blanket, a scrap of paper, smudged with dirt and tears. Please take care of him. I can't. That was all it said. Clara's breath hitched. She held the baby close against her chest, feeling the fragile heartbeat under her hands. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot, unstoppable, holy. Sam came running when he heard her shouting his name. Clara, what is it? She turned to him, her voice trembling. A baby, she whispered. Someone left him here. Sam's eyes widened. He stepped closer, looking down at the child in her arms. The sight struck something deep inside him. Her eyes widened. I mean he came here for a reason, Sam said, his voice low but certain. Maybe this is God's way of giving us both what we lost. Clara looked down at the infant again, her tears falling freely now. She had once been called barren, broken, a woman without worth. Yet here in her arms was a living child, small, helpless, perfect. And in that moment, the ache she'd carried all those years began to heal. We'll name him Eli, she whispered, after my father. Sam smiled, his hand resting over hers. Eli Calder, he said softly. Sounds right. The baby stirred, letting out a soft sigh, and Clara held him tighter. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel empty. The woman who had been cast out for what she could not give had been chosen, not by chance, not by cruelty, but by grace. And as the morning sun rose high above the ranch, Clara felt her heart awaken fully, because sometimes life didn't take away what was meant for you. It only made you wait long enough to understand its worth. The months after Eli's arrival unfolded like the slow blooming of spring after a long, merciless winter. The Calder ranch, once filled only with wind and silence, now carried the sound of new life, soft cries in the night, gentle laughter at dawn, and the tender rhythm of two souls rediscovering what love truly meant. The baby had turned their world upside down, but neither Clara nor Sam would have had it any other way. From the very first night, Clara refused to let Eli sleep in the spare room. She made a small cradle beside her bed and spent hours just watching him breathe. His tiny chest rose and fell with fragile grace, his little fists curling as if grasping dreams. Each time he whimpered, she was there, soothing him with quiet hums and a steady touch that felt like home itself. Sam, meanwhile, found himself doing things he'd never done before. In the mornings, he'd ride into town for supplies, coming back with milk and cloth instead of nails or ammunition. In the evenings, when the baby wouldn't stop crying, he'd pace the cabin floor for hours with Eli cradled against his broad chest, whispering things he didn't even realize he knew how to say. Sometimes Clara would wake to see him there, the stoic rancher, his rough hands supporting that small, squirming life with infinite care. The sight would make something deep inside her ache in a way that wasn't pain anymore. You're a natural, she whispered one night, watching him from the bed. Sam looked over his shoulder, half smiling, half embarrassed. Don't reckon I am. Just learning as I go. We both are, she said softly. But you make it look easy. He chuckled, his voice low and warm. You forget, Clara. I've been raising calves and colts my whole life. Just never thought I'd be learning to rock one of these. Her laughter was quiet, genuine. You're doing fine. And he was. The weeks turned to months and Eli grew strong. His eyes, a soft storm gray like Sam's, followed Clara everywhere she went. When she sang to him, the same lullaby her mother had once sung before the cruelty hardened her heart, he'd smile and coo until the whole house seemed filled with light. One morning, while Clara was feeding the chickens, Sam leaned against the porch post watching her. The sun caught her hair, lighting it with shades of gold and copper. The sight stirred something inside him. That old ache of love he thought had died with his first wife. But this was different. Clara wasn't a woman who asked for affection or demanded attention. She simply gave. She filled the air around her with quiet strength, with a kind of beauty that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with grace. He thought of what her brothers had said, that she was broken, barren, worthless, and he wanted to ride back east and make them eat those words instead. He turned his gaze toward the child playing with a wooden spoon in the dirt and smiled. Funny, ain't it? He said when Clara came closer. How life gives you what you were told you'd never have. She looked at him, her face soft. I think life just waits for the right heart to be ready. He nodded, tipping his hat back. Maybe so. She stood beside him in the quiet, the smell of hay and morning air filling the space between them. Sam, she said suddenly, you ever think, maybe Eli's ours? Not by blood, but by something greater. He turned to her, his gray eyes deep and steady. He is ours, he said simply. He always will be. The truth of those words hit her like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't hide them. Instead, she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For a long moment they stood that way, two people who'd been cast aside by the world, now made whole by something small enough to fit in their arms. But peace, as they both knew, never lasted long on the frontier. Word began to spread in town about the child. Folks whispered that Clara and Sam had taken in a foundling. Some said the baby was the child of a saloon girl who'd run off. Others claimed the mother had been killed by outlaws. There were even rumors that the child's real father was a man from the army, one who might come looking. Clara heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies. The way the women in the general store smiled too politely, the way their voices softened when they said, "Bless your heart," as if it were a curse wrapped in sweetness. She pretended not to notice, but each word carved deep. That night, as she rocked Eli to sleep, she whispered to him, "They don't understand, my love. They don't know that you're ours, that you're the reason I finally believe God hasn't forgotten me." Sam stood in the doorway listening. He didn't say anything, just watched her, his chest heavy with love and sorrow. He knew what she didn't, that in the West, peace was fragile. The same land that grew life could take it away without warning, and sure enough, trouble came sooner than he expected. A cold autumn morning brought a stranger to the ranch. He rode in on a black horse, his coat long, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Clara saw him first through the kitchen window, and a shiver ran through her. She set Eli in his cradle and stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked carefully. The man looked her over, not rudely, but with a sharpness that made her uneasy. "Name's Marshall Jensen," he said. "Looking for a rancher by the name of Sam Calder." "He's in the barn," she said, her voice steady, though her heart began to race. The marshal tipped his hat. "Much obliged, ma'am." When he was gone, Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't know why, but something in his voice and that cold, official tone made her feel like the wind had turned against them. She found Sam in the barn a few minutes later, talking quietly with the marshal. His face was hard, his hands clenched at his sides. "What is it?" she asked. Sam's eyes flicked to hers. "They're saying the baby was stolen," he said quietly. Her blood ran cold. "Stolen?" The marshal's expression didn't change. "A woman in Silver Creek claims her infant was taken from her doorstep. Matches the age and description. She's been looking for him for weeks." Clara's knees went weak. She gripped the stall door for balance. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling. "We found him here." "He was abandoned. That's what the note said?" the marshal asked. She nodded, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, I swear it." Sam stepped between them, his voice low and calm but edged with steel. You ain't taking that baby till we know the truth. You hear me, Marshal? The lawman studied him for a long moment. You got till sundown tomorrow. If I don't hear otherwise from Silver Creek, I'll be back with papers. And then he rode off, leaving dust and dread in his wake. Clara sank to the ground, clutching the edge of the stall. Sam, she whispered, they can't take him. I can't lose him. He knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. You won't, he said firmly. I'll ride to town first light and find out the truth myself. Her tears soaked through his shirt, but he held her tighter. We were meant to find him, Clara, he said, his voice breaking. God didn't bring him here just to take him away. And in that dim barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses and fear, she clung to him, the man who had given her a name, a home, and now a family. But as the wind howled outside and the night fell heavy, a single thought haunted her heart. The next morning came gray and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into a man's bones and makes even the strongest heart tremble with unease. The dawn light fell over the Calder ranch in streaks of silver and ash, painting the land in stillness. Clara Wendell stood at the window, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the horizon as if she could stop the sun from rising. She hadn't slept all night. Eli had cried for hours, not out of hunger or pain, but as if he too could feel the tension that had swallowed the house whole. Every time he whimpered, she pressed him close against her chest and whispered, "You're mine, my love. No one will take you from me." But deep inside, fear coiled like a living thing. Behind her, Sam Calder buttoned his coat, his face carved in that quiet determination she had come to know too well. He'd packed his saddlebag before sunrise. His revolver hung low at his hip. He looked like every story she'd ever heard of men who rode out to face the kind of fight that didn't always end with words. "Sam," she said softly, "what if this woman truly believes he's hers?" He stopped near the door and looked at her. "Then she'll have to prove it." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. "What if she can?" Clara whispered. His jaw tightened. "She can't, because God don't make mistakes like this. That baby was left here for a reason." She wanted to believe that. She needed to. But belief and fear are brothers that often live in the same heart. "Promise me something," she said, stepping closer. "Whatever happens, don't do anything that'll get you taken away too." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Clara," he said quietly, "you've already lost too much in this life. I won't let this be another." And then, before she could speak again, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Trust me," he whispered. And with that, he was gone, riding into the pale morning, his figure shrinking against the vastness of the plains. The day crawled by with the cruel patience of something waiting to break. Clara spent the hours tending the fire, holding Eli close and watching the road. Every shadow that moved across the hills made her heart leap. Every gust of wind that howled through the chimney sounded like a warning. The ranch felt different without Sam. Emptier. Quieter. By noon, clouds had rolled in thick and low. A storm was building. And just when she began to pray for the sight of Sam's horse returning, another sound cut through the silence. Hooves. She ran to the window, her pulse hammering. It wasn't Sam. The marshal rode up again, this time with two other men. One of them was a woman, pale-faced, her hair pinned neatly, her dress far too fine for the dust and wind of the plains. She looked out of place here, fragile and trembling, like someone who'd wandered too close to something wild. The marshal dismounted and knocked hard on the door. Clara opened it before he could knock again. "Where's Sam?" she demanded. "On his way back, I reckon," the marshal said, "but I had to return. This here's Mrs. Hartwell, she's the one claims the boy." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the woman, the soft hands, the pale skin untouched by work or sun. Her eyes, wide and wet with tears, darted toward the cradle where Eli slept. "Please," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I just need to see him." Clara stepped in front of the cradle instinctively. "No," the marshal raised a hand. "Ma'am, no one's taken him, not till this is settled. But she's got a right to look." Clara's throat burned. "He's mine," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone left him on our land. That was God's choice." The woman began to cry. "He's my son," she whispered. "I didn't abandon him. He was stolen from my doorstep by a drifter. I've been looking for months." The words hit Clara like a blow. She shook her head. No, you're lying." But deep inside, a small, cold doubt began to creep in. What if it was true? What if the note had been written not by a mother giving up, but by a thief leaving behind the proof of his cruelty? Before she could speak again, the sound of another horse echoed through the yard. Sam. He rode in hard, his coat whipping in the wind, his face grim and fierce. He dismounted in one swift motion and strode toward the house. "Marshal," he barked, "we need to talk." The marshal turned, but Sam's glare stopped him cold. "The woman's telling the truth," Sam said, his voice like gravel. "I checked in Silver Creek. She did lose a baby, but it weren't this one." The woman gasped. "That's not possible." "It is," Sam said sharply. "Your child was born early in spring. This boy wasn't left on my land till late summer. The ages don't match." The marshal frowned. "You certain?" Sam reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Got the doctor's record from Silver Creek. This boy's younger by near 2 months." For a long moment no one spoke. Only the wind moaned through the valley. The woman broke down completely, sobbing into her gloved hands. "Then where's my baby?" she whispered. The marshal put a hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the door. "We'll keep looking, ma'am," he said softly. Then he looked at Sam. "Guess I owe you and your missus an apology." "You owe that boy his peace," Sam said quietly. And just like that, they were gone, leaving the ranch quiet again except for the steady crackle of the fire inside. When the door closed, Clara turned toward Sam, tears spilling down her cheeks. She clutched Eli to her chest and let out a sob that shook her whole body. "You found the truth," she whispered. "You brought him home." Sam stepped closer, resting his rough hand against her back. "He was already home," he said gently. For a long time they stood there, the three of them, wrapped in the warmth of the fire and the grace of what they'd nearly lost. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, slow and soft, pattering against the windows. The air smelled clean again, washed of dust and fear. Sam leaned down, his forehead touching Clara's. "You were right," he murmured. "God's been watching all along." She smiled through her tears. "I never stopped believing that, even when it hurt." He kissed her then, not with urgency but with quiet reverence, like a man finally surrendering to something holy. And when they pulled apart, Eli stirred between them, his little hand pressing against both of theirs. In that tiny gesture, they saw it, the truth that had always been waiting for them. They weren't broken people who'd been handed scraps of grace. They were a family, forged not by blood but by mercy. Years later, folks would tell stories about Sam Calder and his wife Clara, the ranchers who raised a child they hadn't birthed, who built a life out of the ashes of loss. And every evening, when the sun sank low over the cottonwoods and the cattle wandered home, Clara would stand at the fence, Eli in her arms, and whisper the same words she'd spoken the day they found him. "You were left in the dust, my darling," she'd say softly, "but love found you first." And somewhere beyond the hills the wind would carry her words, across the plains, through the canyons, to the edge of the sky. A song of grace. A story of redemption, a testament to love that blooms even in barren soil.